Millions of people today live with anxiety and depression that never fully leaves. They manage it, they learn to function alongside it. Some of them have had therapy for years, some take medication, and some do both. And they are grateful for the relief those things bring, but something remains. A restlessness that survives good seasons, a heaviness that returns without obvious cause, a sense of inner fragmentation that no external change seems to permanently repair. If that is you, I'm not going to tell you to stop your treatment. I'm going to tell you something that fathers knew that most modern frameworks have never addressed. Anxiety and depression are not only psychological conditions, they are also spiritual ones. And the part of you that is spiritual cannot be reached by cognitive techniques or corrected by chemistry alone. The Church Fathers understood this with extraordinary precision. They mapped the inner life of the human person in a way that modern psychology is only beginning to approach. And they left us a path. That is what this video is about. And it is also what a book is about, which I will mention as we go. But first, I want you to understand the diagnosis, because until you see what the Fathers saw, the remedies they prescribed will not make sense. The Fathers taught that the human person has a faculty they called the Nous. It is often translated as intellect, but that translation is too thin. The Nous is better understood as the eye of the soul. It is the innermost capacity of the human person for perceiving God, for discerning truth, and for resting in divine peace. When the Nous is healthy and oriented toward God, the person experiences what the Fathers called inner stillness, hesychia in Greek. When the Nous is disordered, darkened by passion and spiritual neglect, the person experiences exactly what we know clinically label as anxiety and depression. Disorders like anxiety, depression, and spiritual apathy, the book on which this video is based states directly, are symptoms of a Nous that has become clouded or distracted, losing its natural orientation toward God and truth. This is not mysticism divorced from practical reality. Metropolitan Hierotheos of Nafpaktos, whose foundational research on Orthodox psychotherapy spans decades, identifies the Church as a spiritual hospital whose purpose is precisely this kind of healing, not symptom management, but ontological restoration. The healing of what you are at the deepest level, not merely the adjustment of how you think or feel at the surface level. Secular psychology at its best offers valuable tools, but it operates on a reduced map of the human person. It treats the mind. The Fathers treated the soul. The Philautia, self-love or egoism, which the Fathers identified as a root passion, is also a direct generator of anxiety and depression. When the self becomes the center of one's inner world, every threat to the self becomes a potential catastrophe. Every relationship, every assessment of whether life is going well is measured against personal satisfaction. And this relentless self-audit creates what Elder Tadeusz of Witownika described as thoughts that are the root of most psychological problems. The cult of self-improvement, which modern therapeutic culture often amplifies without realizing it, can make a person more fragile, not more resilient, because it increases the weight placed on the individual self to perform its own healing. The Fathers had a specific name for the intrusive thoughts that fuel anxiety and drive people toward despair. They called them Logismoi. The word means roughly mental intrusions, but the Fathers were precise about their nature in a way that modern psychology is not. Logismoi are not random neural noise. they have their direction, they have character, and they arrive with a specific aim to erode trust, to generate fear, to move the person away from God and toward hopelessness. Saint John of the Ladder defined fear as a loss of assurance. That loss of assurance is precisely what Logismoi produce when they are entertained. They whisper that you are alone, that there is no hope, that your situation is permanent, that you are too broken to be restored. The Desert Fathers taught that the critical distinction is between thoughts that come and thoughts you keep. A logismos arriving in the mind is not a sin and not your fault. What you do with it is entirely within your power. The strategy they prescribed is not suppression, which drives the thought underground, and not engagement, which gives it energy. It is watchfulness, Nepsis. You observe the thought, you name its character, you refuse to consent to it, and you return your attention to prayer. This is not passive, it is a form of active inner combat that practiced consistently, gradually, changes the inner landscape. The person who learns to guard the nous in this way begins to experience a reduction in the density and force of anxious intrusions. Not because the battle ends, but because the nous grows stronger through the exercise. Saint Porphyrios offered a related teaching that is especially powerful for anxiety. He did not instruct people to fight their anxious thoughts directly. He taught redirection. Turn your attention toward beauty, toward prayer, toward love of neighbor. The anxious spiral, he understood, feeds on self-focus. When you redirect the inner gaze outward and upward, the spiral loses its fuel. This is not avoidance, it is a reorientation of the nous toward its proper object. It is the technique the book I recommend covers in a full dedicated chapter, because it is practically one of the most effective patristic tools for breaking the cycle of chronic anxiety. The book is called Where Therapy Ends. You will find the link in the pinned comment. I want to tell you honestly that what is in it, because I think you deserve to know before you decide whether it is for you. It covers the full patristic science of inner healing across 14 chapters. It addresses anxiety and depression through the theology of the Nous and the Logismoi, as we have been discussing. It goes through the Desert Fathers' strategy of non-engagement, the Jesus prayer and its documented psychological effects on the nervous system, the Orthodox fasting tradition, and how it disciplines the body in a way that supports mental clarity. The theology of suffering and how pain is transformed rather than merely survived. Saint Silouan the Athonite's teaching on despair as a spiritual weapon and how to answer it. The relationship between confession and psychological liberation. The role of the spiritual father as a physician of the soul, and how to integrate all of this with whatever clinical care you are already receiving. It does not ask you to abandon medicine or therapy. It asks you to understand that there is a dimension of your healing that those things cannot reach. And it shows you what the fathers prescribed for that dimension specifically. Depression at its spiritual death is what the fathers called Akedia and despair. Akedia is a word almost lost from modern usage, but it describes precisely the condition many people bring to their psychiatrists. A profound inner flatness, a loss of appetite for life, a feeling that nothing matters and that God, if He exists, is very far away. The fathers did not pathologize this state. They took it seriously as spiritual reality. They recognized it in the great saints themselves, which is one of the most important things the tradition offers. The saints suffered this darkness too. Their suffering does not invalidate their path, it authenticates it. Saint Silouan the Athonite passed through seasons of such profound darkness that he recorded them with complete honesty in his writings. His answer to despair was not optimism, it was not refrain, it was a paradox. Keep your mind in hell and despair not. This is one of the most striking phrases in the entire body of patristic literature. What it means is this: you can acknowledge the full weight of your suffering, you can descend into the darkest experience of your inner life, and still refuse to give despair the final word. Because despair is a spiritual weapon, it is a logismos at its most aggressive, and the answer to it is not feeling better. The answer is holding the rope of hope even when you cannot feel it in your hands. This is radically different from what therapeutic culture typically offers, which is the management of symptoms and the gradual building of positive effect. That work has value, but the person in the depth of a depressive episode does not experience positive effect as accessible. What the fathers offer them is something else entirely, a posture and endurance with meaning. The cross in Orthodox theology is not something to escape, it is the medicine. Suffering born with faith, in communion with the suffering of Christ, is not meaningless, it is transformative. And that transformation the fathers called Theosis, the gradual deification of the human person through union with God. Through union with God. What I want to leave you with today is this: you are not managing a broken machine. You are a human person created for union with God. And the suffering you carry, the anxiety, the depression, the inner restlessness, is in part the echo of a soul that has lost its orientation. That is not a condemnation, it is a diagnosis, and it comes with a prescription. The fathers gave it to us in extraordinary detail. The Jesus prayer, Nepsis, fasting, confession, the spiritual father, the sacramental life, the redirection of attention toward beauty and toward love. These are not decorative religious practices. They are the specific remedies for specific spiritual illnesses. And they work as a consistent, serious, lifelong engagement with the healing tradition of the Church. So, if everything discussed today resonates with you, and you want the full map, the full patristic path applied systematically to anxiety, depression, despair, and inner fragmentation, then the book Where Therapy Ends is written for you. The link is in the pinned comment below. It draws directly from the fathers, Saint Theophan of Recluse, Saint John Chrysostom, Saint Maximus the Confessor, Saint Silouan and Saint Porphyrios, and the Desert Fathers. So it is honest about what the tradition offers and honest about where clinical support remains necessary. Read it prayerfully, and if something in it raises a question, write it in the comments. God bless you.